Good afternoon. Me and Liam, my buddy, are here at the land. We're right outside the chicken yard, as you can see. So today's video is going to be a little bit different. So normally if you follow along our channel, it's a lot of vlogs about the garden and the farm overall, progress updates on our house and the farm in general. But today I wanted to do something a little bit different. So today we're outside the chicken yard because I want to discuss a few things and give you 5 ways to prepare for chickens, to bring egg-laying chickens to your property or your farm or your home. There's a few things that I wish we had known when we first bought egg-laying chickens, so I figured I could share a little bit of that knowledge, hopefully, so that way you guys have some food for thought before, you know, prepping your chicken yard and prepping your area and your space for the bringing on of egg-laying chickens. So we'll go take a look. So behind me you'll see our original coop. It's like an abandoned ride at Disney World. So this thing is what we raised our first chickens in. So when we first started our journey towards sustainability and farming and homesteading, we actually went through the process of buying a coop and preparing a chicken yard for our 2 egg layers. So we bought 2, we split up a group. You usually have to buy them in 6s. So we split up, took 2 chickens and our friends took 4 chickens. We just wanted to start small. So we bought a small coop. This thing served its purpose. I wouldn't say I would buy it again, but it served its purpose. So you can see it's just so as I mentioned, this coop served its purpose for us for the time that we had it and the time that we used it, but clearly we don't use it anymore. So there's reasons for that. We'll go through some of those reasons today, but ultimately I want to discuss 5 things that you'll want to know before you bring egg layers onto your farm or your property. So we'll walk through those 5 areas today, and you'll see why we decided to go from that to all that. So number 1 on my list of things that you want to be aware of before bringing egg layers onto your property is to always be aware of your surroundings. I learned that from my great mentor, Ras Al Ghul. He taught me to always be aware of my surroundings. So I bring that to you as well. So those of us who know us or have followed along on our channel know that we started out kind of on a suburban homestead. So we are in the process of moving from our neighborhood to kind of our property, our 14-acre property that we bought and are building a house on and building our farm on. But we initially started out in a neighborhood. So the reason I say to be aware of your surroundings is because chickens are noisy. So you may think, yeah, roosters are loud, they cock-a-doodle-doo in the morning, but that's not it. Hens can also be really loud. So hens, when they're laying eggs, if you've never heard a hen lay an egg before, it gets really noisy. I used to be able to be in my upstairs, farthest away room in the house from the chicken coop, and I used to be able to tell exactly when they were laying eggs because they'd get that loud. So be aware of your surroundings. If you have neighbors nearby, and you don't want them to know that you have chickens, like we didn't want ours to know that we had chickens, then you need to be aware of that. There's a rooster. They're loud. You already know that. But if I can get a hen on video too, we'll do that. But just so you know, be aware of your surroundings. So 1, for the noise factor, and then 2, you also want to be aware of any predators that might be nearby. That'll also factor into your decision on whether you do a open run like we're doing now, or whether you do a closed run like we used to do. So when we lived in a neighborhood, we did a closed run because we didn't want the chickens to get out because we lived in a neighborhood. So those are things to think about too. So be aware of your surroundings. Where are you raising these chickens? Are they being raised in a neighborhood like we are? Are they being raised in a small plot of land, where you need them to stay pretty contained? Those are things to think about. but also, as I mentioned, what predators are nearby. So when you're on a more open piece of property, you need to be aware of the potential predators that could be nearby. So for us, the main predators that we face probably are coyotes out here. So as long as you can get those chickens in the coop at night, you should be okay with predators like that. The other big predator that we face out here are birds of prey, like hawks, falcons, things like that. They tend to live out here too, and they will swoop down into your yard and grab your chickens potentially. We do have an open air yard, but ours is relatively surrounded by wooded area. So it's not that common that we see airborne predators swooping over our chicken yard. So we felt comfortable to do an open air yard out here. The next thing you'll want to consider is how much space that you need in both your chicken coop and your chicken yard if you are going to do a chicken run or chicken yard. So when we started out, as I mentioned, we started in this small coop and attached a tiny run for the chickens. So we had 2 chickens in here. Typically a good rule of thumb is that you need to provide each chicken with about 3 feet of open coop space per chicken. 3 square feet, that is, 3 square feet of open coop space per chicken. And then your run needs to be somewhere between 5 and 10 square feet if you are going to provide a run for that chicken. Now, in most cases, people will say that the more free run space that you give your chicken, the happier they'll be. So, happy chickens lay happy eggs. So now, we've given them a lot of open space. So if you have the ability to do that, that's a good rule to live by, is to give them as much space as you can. So with the amount of space that you want to give your chickens, you need to know how many chickens you're going to get. So when you are considering first your surroundings, understanding how much area you have to devote to them, and then second, figuring out the space that you need in both your coop and your chicken yard, that'll help you determine how many chickens you can actually hold. So right now, we have our chickens on about a 1/4 acre yard, and then our coop is 8 by 12. Now we have 30 chickens, so we have more than enough space both in the coop and in the chicken yard for these chickens. So you need to figure out exactly how much space each of those chickens needs, and then you can kind of do some backwards math and figure out how many chickens you can actually get. So I would say before you even purchase the egg layers that you're going to have, you need to figure out how much space you have to offer them, and then you can figure out how big of a coop you can fit on there, and then how much yard space you can give them. Alright, so after you've determined how much space you can provide for your chickens, determine the size of your coop, determine the size of your yard, one thing that I would recommend thinking about is figuring out if you want an open air run, which I'll take you over. So open air means there's nothing on top of the chicken yard. So these chickens have free run to go in and out of the coop. They have free run to jump on top of this fence if they want. They can jump out and fly out potentially if they have wings that you haven't clipped. And then, it's just all open air, so potentially predators can get in, which you need to think about. So I would seriously consider figuring out if you want open air like that, or a closed run like I just showed you. So that small closed run, there's pros and cons to both. So pros for open air would mean that the chickens have, virtually a lot more space to roam, to jump, to fly, all that kind of stuff, whereas they don't have that in the closed run. Cons of an open air would be the predators. So you have more predator pressure potentially. It would also be that you could lose some chickens to escaping out of the top. So if you are considering an open air run, you also need to consider, do you want to clip their wings? So a majority of our chickens' wings are clipped. once those chickens are clipped, they can still fly a very slight bit. It's more like aggressive jumping and flapping, but they can get off the ground still. So consider that, of course, but it does severely limit their ability to get up a tall fence. So our fence is 5 feet high, and any of the chickens that have their wings clipped have a tough time getting up there. In a pinch, they could do it, but they have a tough time doing it. Whereas a chicken who has all of its flying feathers, it can actually scale that no problem. One jump, it's up there, and it's right over. So consider that if you do want to do an open air run, you need to consider clipping the chicken's wings. If you all want to know how to clip a chicken's wings, please feel free to comment below. Let us know that you want to see that, how to do it. It's, you know, a very simple process. It does not hurt the chicken. It's pretty much like giving them a haircut. It would just limit their ability to fly. Some people are comfortable with that, some are not. If you want to understand that process more and see it and how to do it, then please let us know, comment below. One more thing I wanted to show you in regards to determining open air or closed air is this space. This little space that we have is really hard to clean. So you got to get down on your hands and knees, rake out any old bedding. When you open this, you've got to stick your arm in there, clean everything out, avoid the chickens. So it's kind of a painful process to clean kind of a closed small coop like that. So open air definitely allows you the freedom of, certainly with this yard, it allows you to just kind of let nature clean it up. And then even with my coop, I can stand in there. I'm 6 foot. The coop is basically a shed that we've converted into a coop. I'm tall enough to get in there, and I can clean it out so much easier. I just bring a broom and I just sweep out the pine shavings and all that, put them into a wheelbarrow and dump them into our compost pile. So it's super easy, much easier to clean, something you can stand up in. So consider that when you are either getting a closed or an open run and coop. Consider the height of it. If you can stand in it, it's much easier to clean. So think about that as you're getting prepared to bring chickens onto the farm. Okay, for this next point, I want to bring you into the coop. So finally, you're probably wondering, why isn't this guy just brought us into the coop already? I want to take you into the chicken yard and coop so we can discuss this next point. So for my next point, I do want to bring you into the chicken yard and the chicken coop to kind of illustrate something that I think is important to think about when you are getting ready to, you know, bring egg layers onto your farm. So at this point, we have, just to recap, we've discussed 3 things. So we've discussed the surroundings. You need to be aware of your surroundings before preparing your chicken area. 2, you need to understand your space. How much space does the chicken need? How big of a coop should I get based on the number of chickens I want? And then how big of a yard or run do I need to give them in order to accommodate the number of chickens I want as well? So that's point number 2. Point number 3 is to understand if you want an open air or closed chicken run. So we've gone through those 3 points. So point number 4, I'm going to bring you into the chicken yard to hopefully illustrate a point that we've been dealing with. And point number 4 is actually understanding the breeds of chickens and the differences between roosters and hens and the potential aggression that can come with roosters and even some broody hens as well. So as you can see, we've got a pretty diverse crowd here. We emphasize diversity here on this farm, so we've got all kinds of chickens, we have hens and roosters, and they are many different breeds. So the next thing you want to consider, point number 4, would be the types of egg-laying hens you want on your farm, and potentially If you want roosters, or it's not the easiest process to sex a chicken, so if you end up with roosters, what do you do? So point number 4, being aware of the breeds that there are out there and how you interact with them. So here's a majority of our flock. You can figure out which, you can figure out which ones are the roosters. So that's George. And the reason I gave you this disclaimer before I got in here, George is a rooster. George takes his job very, very seriously. And what I mean by his job, that roosters, their job typically, if they're the top of the pecking order, is to protect their flock. So George protects his flock so well that he is also aggressive with us, the people who feed him and give him water and potentially love him. He is just as aggressive with us as he is with potential predators that might come into the chicken yard. So if you end up with a rooster, you need to be aware of that. 1, they're noisy, as you already have seen. And 2, they're potentially aggressive. So we have George, and then behind him, we have another rooster who we call Peter. Don't ask us who named the chickens, but there is a difference. George is the top of the pecking order, and he is aggressive. Peter is as sweet as can be, but he is also a rooster, so you never know. It's the luck of the draw. More often than not, we have seen that roosters are potentially aggressive and unpredictable. So he's fine right now, but if I take a step toward him, there's a chance that he'd come after me or attack my feet or jump at me. And right now I have a baby strapped to me, so it's not a great thing if he's potentially jumping at us with his large talons and his spurs, which are those kind of extra toe looking things that they have that are sharp. So we've talked a little bit about roosters, and that you need to know that when you buy hens, there's a chance that you get a rooster, and that there's some dangers with that. But now I want to talk about broody hens. There's one right there. So this is our chicken coop. As I mentioned, I can stand up and walk in it. These are our roost bars. So be aware that every coop that you have chickens in typically needs roost bars. Most of them will come with them if you've bought like a pre-made coop. But if you did not buy a pre-made coop, if you're building one yourself, know that you need roost bars. So that's how chickens sleep. Chickens are by nature a jungle bird. So they sleep in trees to stay away from danger and predators that might be lurking on the ground at night. So for safety, chickens will jump up on these roosts. They'll put their feet around the bars, and that's how they'll sleep all night. To us, that's weird, but to chickens, it's totally normal. That's kind of beside the point I had here, but just be aware that you need roost bars if you are building your own coop. What I wanted to discuss was broody hens. So do your research before you purchase your hens, because you need to understand if the hens that you have are broody. So this hen, this is Carmela. She is an Americana, and she is a little bit broody. So what that means is they want to sit on those eggs. So there's eggs under her right now, and she is just being a good protective mama, and she wants those eggs to hatch. So if the purpose of your egg-laying chickens is to get eggs that you want to eat, you do not want your chickens to be sitting on these eggs for too long. So once you hit about day 3, you need to be aware that those chickens, or those eggs that those chickens are sitting on, could potentially have an embryo in them, or a chicken that's developing. So thankfully Carmela is not very aggressive, but hens that are broody can get a little bit aggressive. So when you're trying to get the eggs out from under them because you don't want them to turn into embryos because you're going to eat them, those chickens might peck you. They might get you. So if you don't want the potential risk of that happening, if you want to just get the eggs and not have to worry about chickens pecking you, potentially drawing a little blood, you'll have to do the research to make sure you're getting a breed that isn't broody. And once again, just to reiterate, broody means that they will want to sit on those eggs. So we've got a couple laying hens who are considered broody. And usually you can tell a chicken is broody by the breed, and you can figure that out ahead of time. So we have one breed particularly that's called salmon faverolles, and they are a French breed that is very broody. So usually a couple of those chickens will be sitting in here. Thankfully, they're not really aggressive when we try to get the eggs, but some breeds are. So you need to be aware of that, you need to know what breeds you're getting, and if you don't want them to potentially peck you or your kids while you're getting the eggs, you need to make sure that you're purchasing non-broody hens, so that way that doesn't happen. The other thing you want to understand when purchasing chickens and figuring out what breeds you want is that chickens don't necessarily lay every day. We've got a nice bouquet of eggs in here, so we have about 30 chickens, 2 of which are roosters, so about 28 laying hens. Chickens tend to lay a lot more in the summer, but if you are under the impression that you are going to get an egg a day from each chicken, in most cases that's not correct. So in most cases you're going to get, I don't know, every chicken's different, so you need to understand what breed you want, so that way, or excuse me, you need to understand how many eggs you want, so that way you can pick a breed that's better for your specific consumption habits, for your family size, and all that. So, as I mentioned, we have about 30 chickens. We are getting, in the summer, about 2 dozen eggs a day, which is a lot. For us, we want to make sure that we are certainly consuming, what we can, but we're a family of 4 with 2 small children, and we cannot consume 2 dozen eggs a day. So 30 chickens might seem excessive, 28 laying hens might seem excessive, but for us it works because one thing we are passionate about as well is being able to share eggs with our community. So we have friends and neighbors who we also want to provide eggs for. We have family that wants eggs when they come into town, or local family that wants eggs. If you plan on selling eggs, you're going to want a certain amount of production as well. So when you are considering the breeds, which is our 4th point, when you're considering those breeds, figure out and do the research on how many eggs those chickens lay a year. And typically you can find out on average how many those breeds lay a year. So figure that out, and that'll tell you how much you typically get, but also know that they lay a lot more in the summer. So the summer months when it's hot and warm and they're active, they're gonna lay a lot more eggs. In the winter, they tend to go a little bit more dormant in regards to laying an egg. So you might have some weeks where you're really short on eggs. So you need to understand that, you need to plan for that. Eggs only last for so long too. So understand the months that you are, or excuse me, the zone that you're in, your climate, understand, how cold it gets and things like that. All that kind of affects laying production. And if you have more colder months, if you're in like a northern climate, somewhere where you get a lot of snow, something like that, know that your egg production may slow way down. And your eggs don't last forever. So if it slows way down at the end of the summer and you didn't prepare, accordingly, you won't really have any eggs to get you through winter. So if that's something that you want eggs in the winter from your own chickens, you need to prepare accordingly. So think about those kind of things when you're selecting your breed, how many eggs they lay. You need to consider if it's a breed that's broody or aggressive. And then you also need to factor in the fact that you may get some roosters in there, and you need to figure out a plan of what to do if you do have roosters and you don't want them. So the last point I want you to consider when you are preparing to bring egg-laying hens and chickens overall onto your farm is what you're going to do with them when they slow down. So the sad fact is chickens stop laying eventually. I would say most breeds have a laying lifespan of about 2 to 3 years. So you'll get eggs for about 2 to 3 years, but when they age out of it, you're left with a chicken and you need to figure out what to do with it. So understand kind of what your plan will be when they do age out of those egg laying years. Do you have the space to take care of them? For us, we have plenty of extra space for chickens. So when our chickens do age out, we can just kind of let them age gracefully and peacefully, and then over time, you know, pass away in the way that nature will intend. But you might not have that space, so you need to be prepared to make potentially a tough decision. So figure out what you want to do. That also comes to play with roosters too. So if you don't want a rooster, if you don't want the potential aggression that comes along with a rooster, you need to understand what to do with them. Do you have a friend or local farm that you could give that rooster to? Are you comfortable taking care of it by, you know, and eating it? Are you comfortable with it just kind of wandering off somewhere, if you know what I mean? So you need to have a plan for when the chickens age out of laying years, or if you end up with an aggressive, you know, rooster. So as I mentioned, we've got more space than we need. So if a chicken is not laying anymore, which we actually have probably 2 chickens, our original chickens that we bought in our neighborhood, are not laying anymore, most likely. It's hard to tell right now with 30, but most likely they're not laying anymore. But we still have the space for them to kind of live their life in a way that you know, is comfortable. They've got plenty of space to run around still. So even though they're not producing eggs, they're still kind of part of our flock, and they can kind of you know, age gracefully and age in a way that, you know, nature would intend at this point. So be aware of you know, what your plan will be when you are purchasing chickens, how much space you have, and be aware of what you want to do with them when they are aged out of their egg laying years. So you notice one thing I didn't really talk about today is feeding and watering the chickens. To be honest, it's up to everyone how they want to set those up. But the point is, feed and water your chickens every day. Give them water, give them fresh water, give them food, make sure they have enough food. If they're emptying it really quickly, you need to give them more food. If they're letting it sit for days, you're probably giving them too much food. So I didn't really feel like that was a point we needed to dwell on, but figured I'd mention it as an honorable mention at the end. So in summation, we'll run through the 5 points. So number 1, be aware of your surroundings. Understand where you are placing these chickens, where you have space for them. Understand any potential noise ordinances that you are violating in your area. Understand your neighbors and your neighborhood. If you have a neighborhood, understand your neighbors on your property and how close your neighbors are in proximity to your farm and your chicken yard. Just make sure you are aware of that. Also be aware that if you have an open air yard, your chickens can get out. And if your neighbors don't like that, you never know what can happen to your chickens. So just be aware of that. Point number 1. Point number 2, make sure you understand your space. So you need to be aware of the surroundings around your chicken coop and your chicken yard, but you also need to be thinking about how much space you can devote to these chickens. So the chicken coop, as a refresher, you need at least 3 feet of space per chicken. And then the chicken yard, preferably 5 to 10 feet of space per chicken. And the actual space itself, the more of it that you have, the better for the chickens and the happier that they'll be. Point number 3, do you want an open air run or a closed run? Remember, there's pros and cons to both. Predator pressure is a lot higher in an open run, and also the potential loss of a chicken or the ability for a chicken to get out is of course much higher in an open run. For the ease of cleaning, an open air run is a lot better. I would also say that an open air run is a lot better for just kind of the happiness level of your chickens. The more space, the better. The more freedom, the better for those chickens, and the happier lives hopefully that they'll have. But we know that's not always the case. So like I said previously, we raised our chickens in a neighborhood, so they needed to be closed in. We also lived in an HOA neighborhood, which I forgot to mention earlier. So it was against our HOA rules to have chickens or livestock or anything in that neighborhood. So I wouldn't advise that, but you need to be aware of those things when you're deciding if you want an open air or closed chicken run. Point number 4 was do the research on what breeds that you want. Understand what amount of eggs that those breeds typically produce on a yearly basis. Understand their temperaments, whether they're broody or not. And then also prepare for the fact that you could potentially get roosters, and understand what goes into that and what you'll have to do. And then lastly, point number 5 was just understanding the plan of attack when you have chickens that are outside of laying age. So figure out what you need to do with them, understand what hard decisions you might have to make if you do have to make hard decisions, you know, and just prepare your space specifically with that in mind, that these chickens do not lay forever. And if you're someone who doesn't want these as pets, you want them as, you know, potentially production animals and want to sell these eggs, and it's not necessarily profitable for you to have chickens that are not laying on your farm, you need to be prepared for what you have to do at that point. So have a plan in place for what happens when these chickens are no longer laying. So that's it. So those are your 5 points to think about before bringing egg-laying chickens onto your farm. So think about those 5 things, prepare yourselves, do your research, and be, you know, just fully prepared and comfortable before you even bring them onto your farm. Every animal you bring on is a new challenge, and it's a new set of anxieties and things like that. So just make sure you prepare yourself as much as you can. Keep those 5 points in mind so that way you feel as comfortable as possible before bringing new animals onto the farm. Chickens are great. Egg-laying chickens are some of our favorite things. We've always done them. So just think about you know, the benefits of that and how you want to prepare to make them comfortable and happy and provide great eggs for you and your family. So with that, I'll sign off. Thank you for watching us today. If you like these kind of videos, let us know. If you don't like them, let us know that too. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video and peruse our channel for other videos as well. Most of our videos aren't like this, so if you don't like this, go watch some of our other stuff and like and subscribe for those. And then of course, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that you always had a space on our farm, and I guess in our chicken coop. Thanks folks.